In this video, we're going to look at some pitfalls to look out for when installing Anaconda and JupyterLab, and also which settings to set in JupyterLab to get the most out of it, and which functions to use in JupyterLab to get started. To download Anaconda, simply Google Anaconda download and you'll get to their download page. They'll ask you here to register, but you can skip that step and it'll take you directly to the download section where you have Windows, Mac OS, and Linux installers available. I'm on a Windows computer because most of the people that come to my Python courses are Windows users, so I want to show the problems that might arise in the Windows installation. I've also installed it on a MacBook and the issues were similar. This Windows installation doesn't have anything installed right now other than Firefox, so let's install Anaconda. The download has finished. The first couple of steps were straightforward. Now it asks you for a couple of customizations here. Start menu shortcuts, matter of taste. Add Anaconda 3 to my path variable. They don't recommend doing that. We can still do that later if we need it. Registering Anaconda 3 as the default Python 3.11. This is useful because when we install JupyterLab later, it will be able to use Anaconda, which is what we need. The next step might take a while, just took 5 minutes on this machine. In the last step, it asks you to launch Anaconda Navigator. It's not necessary. This is getting started. Let's have a look at that. It's just some documentation. You also don't need that. Next, let's install JupyterLab Desktop. Just Google it and you'll find the GitHub page. And from here, you just scroll down to the installation part. You have Windows, Mac OS, and Linux available. After downloading, you just install it. It's pretty straightforward. At the last step, it asks you to run JupyterLab. So let's do that. When you first start JupyterLab, this is what it looks like. On another computer, I had problems when starting a new session because there was no environment installed that it could run in. Let's see if we also run into that problem here. We actually don't. On this computer where everything is newly installed, everything worked out of the box. I'm going to cut in from the other computer what the problem looked like and what the solution was, just in case you run into the same problem. You can start a new session here, which on this computer actually failed. Once you click on Change the Default Python Environment, this window here pops up. It looks like this is the problem here. Let's install this bundled environment installation. With that, let's try again. New session. And with that, it finally worked. You might have to do another restart of the computer or of JupyterLab, but then it should work. You select the kernel, and now we can do our standard test just to see everything is working. A equals 5, B equals 3, print A plus B, and that works. I'm going to switch computers now because my MacBook is a lot faster than this Windows computer. We've switched to macOS. What you can do now, double click on a file to open it. This, by the way, also works in Windows. By default on macOS, it'll always go to the dark theme, at least for me. You can switch that here. When you go to the settings, theme, you go to the light scheme. The light theme looks better to me, but that is a matter of taste. Let's check out some other settings. You can go to the settings editor. Whenever you do anything in the settings that is different from the defaults, it'll show up here in the modified section. The most important thing you should change after installing it is to add these rulers. I usually add 2 lines, one at 80 characters and one at 100 characters, so you know when to do a line break. For some reason, JupyterLab has a couple of different places where to add the ruler. So one at the top, one here in the middle, and another one here. But the only thing you need to set is the one at the top. It might not show up immediately, then you simply need to restart JupyterLab. And then you have the lines that you can see here. Where you should do a line break is more or less regulated by the PEP8 standard. The PEP8 standard says you should do a line break after 78 characters, but also gives you some leeway to go up to 100. This is why I have 2 lines at 80 and 100. It depends on the size of your screen. If we switch to the second lecture, I can show you what I mean by that. You can, for example, have the lecture script open and the exercises, and if we pull them now to the side, you still want to be able to see both the lines in both scripts. Let's close our file explorer here. And then you can see both the 80 character line and the 100 character line in both scripts. However, this is a 32-inch monitor. On a laptop screen, depending on your zoom level, even 80 characters can be too much. So you won't be able to see the lines in 2 notebooks. And having 2 notebooks next to one another is useful if you either use version control like Git and you want to see the different versions of your notebook and the changes that have happened. Or like here, you have a lecture script, you have exercises, and you want to have them open at the same time. Another thing that you can decide right after installation is how you want the UI to look like. So either multi-document IDE is what you see here, where you have these tabs. When you go to single document IDE, you only see the tab that is currently open and you have no way of switching, which for the settings means you basically cannot get out of the settings. To me, this is not very useful. So I usually stick to the multi-document IDE so you can use all the advantages that JupyterLab has, like switching between tabs. However, if you only want to work on one notebook and you want to go full screen and you don't want to have any distractions, I can also recommend the Zen mode. because here in the Zen mode, you have the entire screen for your script. Another thing I'd recommend using right from the start is the table of contents, so you can structure your notebooks by using these markdown cells. You see up here, this is not a code cell, but a markdown cell. When you use these hashtags, you can have multiple levels of headings. So with one hashtag, you get level 0, with 2 hashtags, level 1, and with 3 hashtags, you get level 2. By doing that, you get a nice structure in your notebook. First of all, when you scroll through it, it's a little bit easier to see what you're actually looking at. When you click here, you can also jump to the different sections. To get back to the launcher, you can always click this plus button here, or this plus button in the tab bar. To create a new notebook, simply click here. If we then run our standard test of a equals 5, b equals 3, print a plus b, run that, we see that works. What you can do now is to create a new console for the notebook. If you just want to try some things out, or you want to print some things just for debugging purposes, you can create this extra terminal and put all your print statements down here. This way, you don't clutter up your main notebook with all these print statements. You can keep your main notebook clean and put all the stuff that is simply there for debugging purposes into that console that in the end you can just close and then it's gone. Last thing I want to show you here is how to install an environment and how to activate it. Let's say we have an environment file here in our folder. If I want to install that now, I can use this conda and create command from here, copy that out, open a terminal, and then paste that in here. That will install the environment. Installing an environment sometimes takes 20 seconds, sometimes it takes 15 minutes. It'll depend on how many packages you're installing, your internet connection, how busy the Anaconda servers are. When you want to use it, you can either run this conda activate command if you want to use it here in the terminal. But if you want to use it in one of your notebooks, there's an even easier way. So you can just open that notebook, and then in the top right, you'll see the active environment. And we can switch that now to our test Python course environment, the one that we just installed. You might have to restart JupyterLab in order for this to show up, but then it should be there. You see one little bug here in macOS. Whenever I restart JupyterLab, it will reload the dark theme. You can switch it again by going to the theme. So far, I haven't found a way to make this default and make it stay default. This seems to be a bug right now. In Windows, I did not have that issue, but it's not that big of a problem. You can see in the top right, we're in this test Python course environment, the one that we just installed. And if you wanted to make that default, you can go to Manage Python Environments. That opens this window here, and you find the test Python course environment. You copy the Python path, and in the settings, you make that your default. Whenever you start a new notebook, this will be the environment that is loaded by default. We are back on the Windows computer because there's one difference between macOS and Windows. When you open a terminal here in Windows, it unfortunately doesn't open Anaconda prompt, but Windows PowerShell. And you cannot run conda commands in Windows PowerShell, except if you run through some steps that I show in this video. However, if all you want to do is install one environment and then use it inside of JupyterLab and you don't need to run conda commands all the time, it might be easier to just install it in Anaconda prompt. Let's do that here. To open Anaconda prompt, simply search for it in the address bar. Usually the first 4 letters are enough, then it pops up. You see here the base environment is active, so conda prompts are going to work. To install the environment from this environment file, open the folder, copy that path. Then in the Anaconda prompt, type in cd for change directory, paste in the path, and then you're also inside of that directory. Open the environment file, and then copy this conda command, paste that in here. So conda env create from file, lab Python course environment, and then it'll be installed. By the way, while this is installing, make sure that when you install a new environment, you include JupyterLab here in the dependencies, so in the packages that are going to be installed, because otherwise it might not work in JupyterLab Desktop. After about 5 minutes, this was installed. Should it take longer on your machine, don't worry about it. Just let it run. On my other computer, it took half an hour yesterday, so it always depends. More importantly, once it's installed, you can close the Anaconda prompt and also close the environment file. Now, if we try to activate the environment, we'll see it's not here. So we need to restart Jupyter and then it'll be there. Let's do that. So close it. We can double click on one of our Jupyter notebook files, open them with JupyterLab. And now, first of all, we see opening a file by double clicking also works in Windows. Second of all, now that we've restarted, we can choose the environment that we just installed. When we click on it, it'll restart the notebook with that environment active. This might take a bit, but it's still a lot faster than it used to be, where you needed to set up a new Jupyter notebook server, open all your files again, and then you would be in a new environment. Here you just click and you're there.